Many free trade agreements.
Senator Di Natale.
President, it's with some regret that I stand here today to give my first speech in this new parliament to mount a strong defence of science. It appears that the role of science in this parliament is once again under threat. The situation now is even more dire than it was in the previous government, and the forces of anti-science have been very, very powerful in this new Abbott government. The first piece of legislation that has been introduced into the new 44th Parliament, has been to wind back action on climate change, some of the most significant, some of the most ambitious action to address the issue of climate change that the world has seen. And yet, in the face of the mounting scientific consensus around climate change, that we have a looming catastrophe that all the evidence says is getting worse. And what do we see? We see the introduction of a bill that would repeal action on climate change. The government dismisses action on climate change as an impost to business. And it uses this fact as though it somehow trumps the physical realities of chemistry, of physics, the laws of thermodynamics. The physical world has a very inconvenient way of intruding on our lives, and witness the bushfires in New South Wales, witness the storms in the Philippines, and you understand that the impost on business comes a very long second behind the impact on the lives of ordinary people if we continue to sit on our hands. We've been accused of politicising some of these great tragedies, but it's a uniquely Australian proposition that to mention what scientists right around the world acknowledge, that climate change means more fires, more floods, more superstorms, is somehow a political act. Well, the political act is in staying silent. The political act is in ignoring the pleas of the lead negotiators at the current climate change talks in Warsaw, coming from the Philippines and asking us to take urgent action to prevent more of these storms from hitting their shores. But of course, the anti-science agenda of this government's not restricted to climate change. We're now seeing that we face the prospect of cuts to higher education, which really undermine the ability of this nation to tackle some of the most pressing problems that confront us. Instead of investing in research and development, in building a thriving pharmaceuticals industry so that we can once again lead the world in high-tech industries, instead of investing in smart manufacturing, low-carbon manufacturing, we continue to subsidise fossil fuels to the tune of billions of dollars. And now we hear that the CSIRO is to be gutted, and with it the hopes and the careers of countless Australian scientists who may well go overseas. And we can add to our export list the collective wisdom and investment of these great Australian minds. It's a backward-looking, it's a regressive, it's a dangerous, it's an economically irresponsible agenda to take, unless you somehow think that we are miraculously immune from the impacts of climate change, unless you think that the future of the Australian economy is to continue to be the world's quarry and to ignore the potential for high-tech industries that the new economies present us. And nowhere is this anti-science agenda clearer than in the campaign to undermine renewable energy. We have seen the issue of wind power continue to be politicised, and now we see that the Australian government is subsidising some of those very groups who undermine the transition towards clean, renewable energy. Some of those groups have gone so far as to create a new medical condition, wind turbine syndrome. Now, we need to say a few things about wind turbine syndrome. It's a very loose collection of symptoms: nausea, headaches, abdominal pains, vertigo, absence of nausea, and so on. This loose collection of symptoms that are very real to many people and very distressing, and it's not with those people who are experiencing those symptoms that I take issue, but with the campaign that is being run to ensure that those people continue to suffer harms and they recruit new people to experience some of those distressing symptoms. It's worth reflecting on how this condition has gained some traction, much like the placebo effect in medicine, where if you give somebody a treatment and tell them that it's going to work, there's a good chance they'll get benefit, even though that treatment may be nothing more than a sugar tablet. Well, the same is true in reverse. If you tell someone that somebody is going to experience a harm in response to a particular exposure, there's a good chance they'll experience that harm, regardless of what that exposure might be. And in fact, there's a lot of research in this area, a lot of empirical research that shows that when we expose people to the supposed mechanism to wind turbine syndrome, that is infrasound, that they experience symptoms regardless or not of whether that exposure is real. It's been an issue that's been investigated. The NHMRC have made it clear there's no established link. And if you look at the epidemiological evidence, that is the patterns of disease, you see a very clear pattern here. In the countries right around the world, the 200,000 wind turbines operating right around the world, what you see is the presence of this disease in those areas where these campaigners are most active. Here in Australia, we've got 51 wind farms, yet 70% of all complaints about poor health come from those 6 wind farms where the Waubra Foundation, one of those misleading groups, have been most active. In fact, 90% of all complaints came after the 2009 occasion when the Waubra Foundation added health complaints to their list of concerns against wind farms. So we've got a situation here where we have a group that is spreading misinformation, that is perpetuating harm rather than protecting it, based on no plausible biological mechanism through which this could occur, when they could be campaigning against the real impacts of poor air quality as a result of coal mining, for example. And in fact, last year I led an inquiry into this issue because we are seeing more people die from poor air quality than we're seeing die from the road toll. And the mining and combustion and transport of coal is one of the reasons that that's happening. But no, this group campaigns against a clean, renewable form of energy. Despite the fact that if we're able to make the transition towards clean and renewable energy, we mitigate against some of the most important health impacts that climate change will bring against us. Now, the issue here is not that the Waubra Foundation should continue to spread the misinformation that it does. The issue here is that the Australian taxpayer should be subsidising that activity. They are subsidising the work of the Waubra Foundation. That is, that every person in this country makes a donation to the anti-wind activities of the Waubra Foundation because they have been granted deductible gift recipient status. That is, donations to the Waubra Foundations are tax deductible. How can that be, you might ask? Well, they have been granted status as a health promotion charity. A health promotion charity, when in fact their work is much more likely to cause poor health than to prevent it. There's an item in the Charities and Not-for-Profit Commission Act that says that the entitlement exists to registration for an institution whose principal activity is to promote the prevention of the control of disease in human beings. Well, the Waubra Foundation are doing the exact opposite of that, and we're paying for their activities. Even worse than that, we now learn that the Waubra Foundations are commissioning donations, tax-deductible donations, on the basis of their status as a health promotion charity so that they can take action in administrative tribunals against new wind developments. So their health promotion work extends to appeals in administrative tribunals so that they can stop the development of new wind proposals. And it's not hard to, when you start joining the dots, to work out what their real agenda is. You've got Peter Mitchell, who's the current chairman of the Waubra Foundation. Now, he's a current and former director of a number of oil, gas and uranium-related companies. Surprise, surprise. He's a director of Lao, who are a major shareholder of Lao, who's basically the ultimate holding company of a resources fund, which are companies engaged entirely in mining and energy investment, including oil, gas and uranium. He's also the former director of the Australian Institute of Petroleum Limited and Malopo Limited, a company entirely invested in oil and gas. He was the founding public officer for the Western Plains Landscape Guardians. Now, the Landscape Guardians are a group of people who object to wind on the basis of their impact on the landscape. Now, that's a legitimate concern. Some people don't like looking at wind turbines. Beauty's in the eye of the beholder. But science is not in the eye of the beholder. Whether wind turbine syndrome exists is a testable, objective fact. It's been tested and it does not exist. The science is in. Now, what we also see is that Sarah Laurie, who is one of the other directors of the Waubra Foundation, she's a non-practising doctor, and she's the so-called medical director, and I've got no doubt she's genuine in her belief that wind turbine syndrome exists and makes people unwell. But if we all, as medical practitioners, acted according to our beliefs, our gut instinct, our hunches, we'd be using leeches. We'd be burning witches at the stake. And my concern with Sarah Laurie is that she has violated the fundamental principle of what it means to be a medical practitioner. First, do no harm. The Hippocratic Oath. First, do no harm. And this group does enormous harm. Other directors, Liberal politicians, climate change deniers, people with a long history of opposing wind developments. Well, if you're going to do it, be honest about it. Don't ask for subsidies from the taxpayer. Don't dress this all up in some sort of cloak of medical impacts. Be honest about what you're doing. You don't like them? You might be invested in the fossil fuel industry. Well, come clean about that. Don't invent the charade of wind turbine syndrome. This is a group with all the hallmarks of a front group using the same tactics as the tobacco industry did more than 50 years ago, that is to sow the seeds of doubt, muddy the waters, and ensure that you do everything you can to stymie an industry that has the potential to reduce our emissions, to ensure that we create a viable industry in this country that is not one that relies simply on digging stuff out of the ground and shipping it out, but that creates meaningful jobs for people right around the country. And I've just learnt that the Waubra Foundation, the people of Waubra, have taken issue with the Waubra Foundation because they rightly believe that they have damaged the reputation of this town, a town that benefits, and I visited Waubra recently, a town that benefits from that great development there that means that people have jobs, that the local engineers in Ballarat can supply components, that the local workers in the region have full-time employment, and employment in an industry that they believe is the future of this country. So we'll be taking further action on this issue,